Hey, I'm Gretchen Bridgers of the Always Lessons Empowering Educators podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network. Shows on the network are individually owned and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Boone Titanium Rings, found on the web at boonrings.com, is an affiliate partner of Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12. And I'm also a customer. I have this really cool ring that's got these carved pistons and stars in it. I love it. They make rings of titanium that are carved, laser cut, and engraved, as well as they have inlays of many types of materials like meteorite, acrylic, wood, carbon fiber, and so many other types. They also have special collections that are incredible designs. One of the top sellers are the Gamer Rings, the Stealth Series, and the Black Zirconium. As a note, they also make earrings, pendants, cufflinks, and for you musicians, they make cool trumpet mouthpieces. Love it. Go to boonrings.com and at checkout use my code, capital T, capital L, capital K, number 12, and you'll get 10% off your purchase. So go check them out. I love my ring, and I know that you will love yours. Hey, welcome back. Steve here, and today I'm talking with Kaitlin Trujillo. Kaitlin is a key account manager in the U.S. for Impero Software. Join us as we talk about supporting ELL students, special education students, and teachers. What an awesome talk. So much to learn today. Thanks for listening. And but by the way, before you go, it'd be so cool if you would go to my website, stephenmiletto.com/reviews, and rate and review the podcast. Could you do that for me? Thanks so much. Enjoy the show. Hey, do you need help in becoming more effective at teaching virtual classes? Well, NVTA, the National Virtual Teaching Association, has a semester program that is college accredited and designed to help you become more successful as a virtual teacher. A few of the topics that will be focused on are establishing relationships in the virtual environment, virtual instruction best practices, differentiation in the virtual classroom, and managing virtual resources, among others. NVTA is an affiliate partner with Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12, and there's so much there to help you be successful in the virtual classroom. So take a look. Go to my website, stephenmiletto.com/sponsors, find the NVTA logo, and click on it to take you to their website. Happy learning. Hey, Steve here, and my podcast, Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12, is hosted on Podbean. If you use my affiliate link when you sign up for podcast hosting, you will get 1 month free. I've been on Podbean for the whole existence of my podcast since November of 2013. In that time frame, I've had nonstop service. I've had easy access to assistance when I needed help. I've been able to upload unlimited pictures and podcast episodes. The dashboard is easy to use. My Podbean community has grown tremendously. Looking at starting a podcast? Well, use my affiliate link to get 1 month free of hosting. Go to my website at stephenmiletto.com/sponsors and click on the Podbean hosting link to see what plans are offered and choose the one that you like the best. You'll be glad you did.
You are listening to Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12, a podcast for educators, helping you help kids achieve their dreams. And now here's Steve with this week's show.
Kaitlin Trujillo is a key account manager in the U.S. for Impero Software. Before beginning her career in EdTech, Trujillo taught for 10 years in schools in California and Portland. She has taught high school English, ESL, and reading intervention, and also has experience teaching trauma-informed practices. She holds a master's degree in education and a TESOL certification and sees technology as playing a key role in providing equitable instruction to a variety of learners. Kaitlin, thanks for joining me today, and say hi to everyone.
Hi, thank you so much. Excited to be here and talk with you. I love that introduction. It's like, oh yeah, nice walk down memory lane and all the exciting things I've got to do as an educator, and excited to share some more today.
Very cool, because I'm going to ask you to go down that memory lane here a little bit, right? Especially right here in the beginning. So I appreciate it. So before we go any further, Kaitlin, you were a teacher for 10 years. What'd you like most about teaching and working with kids?
I love this question. It's hard to just quantify it into just a couple sentences, but I think everyone gets into teaching because they want to see students go through that learning process. And everyone talks about that light bulb moment that you see your students have. And I really did enjoy that as an educator, taking students at the beginning of the year who didn't know something and then seeing them be able to do that something, by the end of the quarter, the end of the year, or whatever your lesson cycle and your goals were. So seeing students learn and feeling like you got to play an important role in that is so satisfying. And then, I think I got into teaching originally for the belief that I had and still do that, an educated society is a society I want to be part of. And so getting to, be part of this process of educating individuals who will then go on to make a difference in the world and to get to be one small little part of their path towards something great. You get a lot of joy and satisfaction out of that too. And, in line with that, getting to hear back from my students now who are off doing amazing things in different fields of science and research. And there's even one of my former students who's now a teacher in the district where I used to teach, which makes me feel very old, who, reached out to me recently, said, I'm a teacher now too. And she remembers my classroom and her experiences there. And so it's just really cool to be a little piece of all of these different people's journeys.
Isn't that cool? I mean, you can't explain it to somebody because you spend enough time where you got plenty of them that, they'll start finding you or running into you or whatever. And I got to tell you what I've discovered is you can move wherever you want to. You're going to find at some point in time, you're going to be someplace where just out of the blue, someone's going to go and they're going to say your name and it's going to be like, okay. And you turn around and it's like, and usually it happens like in really strange places, like, you're standing in a queue line at some theme park or you're, whatever. And it's the coolest thing. Or something that just happened to me recently. My son called me and said, hey, I was at this conference and I was purchasing something and the gentleman saw my name and he said, there can't be two of them in the world. And he asked me if you were my dad. And I went, oh my gosh. And he told me who he was. And I'm like, geez, I taught him 8th, 9th, and 10th grade. And I'm like, that's a long time ago. Very cool. So
yeah, I actually come from a family of educators. My mom is a retired teacher. Both my brother and sister are teachers and now have moved into district level positions. And so I think we've all experienced that. And I experienced it growing up with my mom running into all her former students who were, in college and beyond when she taught them in elementary school. So yeah, I definitely grew up around that as well.
That's awesome. That's so cool. It's just a neat thing. And to know you had some impact in there, which is what's so cool. So
yeah, exactly.
Love that. So I got to ask you, if you could go back in time just before you stepped in the classroom for the first time, all right, what advice would you give you as a brand new teacher?
Oh man. To me personally, as a brand new teacher, I would say just relax. Relax a little. I was my first couple years teaching us, it was so stressful. I wanted it to be so perfect all the time. And later when you taught a little bit longer, you're a little further into your career, you find that it's those imperfect moments that turn into true, authentic learning experiences for the students. So if you're trying to micromanage and plan and execute this is how I planned it, and this is exactly how it must go, you're probably missing some cool opportunity. So yeah, definitely think about starting your year as a first-year teacher. It's about building relationships with the students. You're starting at a new school or a new district or in a new community that you are not part of, especially, you need to learn what does this community value, because that's going to help you tap into the student population. That's going to help you understand what they value in their homes and then what's going to feel relevant to them at school. So starting with building those relationships and not planning every lesson down to the minute, but, thinking about your lesson objectives and how you're going to guide your students on this learning journey to get them there instead of being too uptight about everything being perfect. It's definitely the advice I would give myself.
That's awesome advice. I love it. That's good stuff because it really is. I mean, I'll never forget my first day in the classroom because I was all set. I had all kinds of stuff ready to go. And now this dates me. So just bear with me. I had a film clip, but in those days you had to have the film projector with the big reel on it. And I'm just showing this little section of this film. And I had that all set to go. And I had an overhead projector with this map on it so I could show this area. And then I had a wall map. And wouldn't you know it, just what happened was I didn't realize how old that film was. It broke twice. And then, the nice thing is in those days, not today, you don't have to deal with stuff like that, right? If you're showing a clip or something like that, what do I do now? Well, you just kind of pull it out and you stick it back in the thing and see if you can pick up from where it broke. And And then, there's a couple of things that happened. The map fell off the wall and a kid tripped over the cord for the overhead projector and broke the bulb. I will never forget that day.
An episode of something on TV, like a comedy series.
It really was. I'll never forget it. And that in itself is probably what helped me chill out, because I was like, okay, so that was plan A, B, and C. So now we shift to D. And the awesome thing was the next door neighbor heard the crash and he came over. And he said, "Don't worry, I got you on this." And he brought me his overhead projector and he put the map back on the board. And he said, "You just go on with your introduction and do all that stuff." And I was like, and it was pretty cool. So I love that advice. So
I bet too that like young teachers who are entering the profession today are probably just as resilient or even more resilient than we were with our hardware failures, because they're probably quite used to software failures. Like you said, teachers don't have to deal with that today. It's like, oh, we've all been there where that video won't load, or you thought it was going to go through your school's filter and it didn't. And you're sitting there like, I can't show this video I was going to show. What am I going to do? And so, I think as much as technology makes our lives easier, that resiliency and, well, that didn't work, so let's try something else. I think that hasn't changed at all.
Not at all. Because that's funny. That's what you made me think of is, it used to say buffering. It's like, no, not buffering. And, today it's just, you're going to see swirls, things like that. It's like, nice. Yes. Gotta love it. Streaming problems are always the killer today. So good stuff. It's, I love the advice that you give yourself, because I always think about this. If I could go back in time and talk to myself and what I would tell me. And so it's neat to hear what other people would tell themselves. So I think that's cool. So tell me why you decided to go into technology. I mean, can you tell us a bit about your role now at Impero, helping other teachers incorporate technology into the classroom?
Yeah, definitely. I just kind of found myself at a position. Every teacher's probably been in this, down this path as a public educator. I was on a temporary contract and my temporary contract expired, and I found myself needing to go back out there and apply for jobs again. And at the time, I started just putting myself out there for positions beyond the classroom. It was a tough time in the economy. I didn't know for sure if I would land back in the classroom in terms of a job goes. And it's a competitive environment in the Portland area I was an English teacher. It's not a really high need for us. There are a lot of English teachers out there in the world. And so I made my move into the technology space by applying for a company whose technology I used in the classroom. And that was a really easy switch for me, because as a teacher, you put your full energy, your reputation, your full worth into every lesson. You get behind it, and you have to kind of have some pride in your work and feel good standing behind it. So I remember in my interview I originally worked for a company called NetOp, which is now under the Impero umbrella. And they said, well, you don't have any experience in this public, private sector. You have all this public education experience. How does this relate to, interacting with customers? And I said, well, I'm not trying to sell garage doors here. I'm trying to work with people I've been working with just in a new way. And so I immediately started working with schools and incorporating a particular tool around classroom management, which we still provide today. And that helps teachers to feel more confident with using devices in the classroom. And, a lot of our customers say, oh, I was scared to do this particular activity. And this is always my favorite thing that I tell teachers in the training. One of our features of our software lets you kind of pause the devices for all students. And when I was in the classroom, I remember having a lot of goals for having these very ambitious projects that I would set up on online learning. And like we just talked about a moment ago, something's bound to go wrong, right? Something fails, something doesn't work how you expected. And so you feel the anxiety go up in the room, and your anxiety is going up and all the students' anxiety is going up. And you thought, I took this huge risk and it's not going how I thought it would. And so, for an example, the software lets you just hit that pause button. No one's devices work. Hey, all the devices are paused. Let's come back together as a class. Eyes on me. Let's talk this through. Let's get this, let's change gears. Let's move on to step 2. Step 1 just blew up in my face, but that's okay because I've got this pause button. Nice. And we're just going to wipe that away. So I think any tool that you can bring into the classroom that makes teachers feel empowered to take risk because they know that they can get it all back if they need it. If things start going a little crazy, they can bring everyone back together. I think that's a good thing. So that's what I do now, is kind of help teachers and incorporate our tools in their classroom, which hopefully in effect get them to incorporate a lot of technology into their classroom.
Very cool. Very cool. You know what? One of the things, and I think we'll probably come back and get a little bit, a little more specific about some of the tools that Impero does have. But let's kind of shift gears for just a minute and let's talk about, you have a lot of experience of teaching ELL kids. Tell us a little bit more about your work in ESL instruction. Let's kind of get into some strategies to keep in mind to help support ELL students. What do you think?
Yeah, I think I've been asked this question before in different situations as like a mentor teacher, and during my master's degree program, we talked about this a lot. And I always go back in my mind to one of my undergraduate education classes, and they said, what does good ESL or ELL teaching look like? And it's good teaching, period. There's no bag of tricks. There's no things where I say, if you do these 3 things, then you can reach your English language learners. It's like, no, it's just good teaching. And it's taking your students for who they are. It's taking into account the kids you have in front of you, and it's teaching them at their level in a way that's accessible to them. And that does not just apply to our ESL population. That applies to any teacher in front of any class across the United States. Working at the secondary level, I've worked with both long-term English language learners where, they've been in the United States and in the public education system since kindergarten, but they're still not, reclassified as English language, fluent, and as well as students who are brand new to the country. And I think those are slightly different populations to work with. The strategies maybe look a little different. Whereas, with the latter, I'm talking more about pronunciation and really like getting into like new vocabulary and new language. And something that I always did that I think is easy for anyone with an EL population to integrate is to think about cross-content collaboration. At the secondary level, we think about our ESL students in their EL classes. They're covering the English language arts curriculum in terms of what the content is we're trying to cover. But my job is to make sure that they are able to access language and learning across their school day. So thinking about how we can incorporate new vocabulary into our classes, because it's something that's going to be important for them to understand their social sciences, their science, their math, or reading. We're reading a short story on the symbolism related to a bird, or like the migration of a bird. There's this really sad short story I used to teach about a bird. And so then maybe we take a little veer to the left and we read a nonfiction text about migration patterns. And we're picking up on new skills and new types of reading skills related to reading nonfiction text, and then bringing that back into our fictionalized text. So, my classroom would be loud. My classroom would be busy. My classroom would have students talking and listening and, engaging in different learning modalities. And I think that's really important too. I think there's been a fear that when we talk about differentiating instruction, whether it's to our English language learners, our special education students, as students are returning to the classroom after this time of distance learning, that means everyone's quietly and individually working on their devices. And I think we have to let go of that fear, because I don't think that's what good differentiation looks like. It looks like choice in the classroom, and choice in the classroom doesn't mean that everyone is quietly and individually working, right? But to circle back to your question about specifically our English language learners, there's a few like really simple things that we can do that technology enables us to do. So I have a longer, more difficult piece of text that I'm having my students read through. Technology allows me to hyperlink that text. Why aren't we using hyperlinks throughout this reading resource so that students can quickly click on a word they don't know and see its definition, link them over to dictionary.com and what that word means? In the same way that I would if I'm reading something that's above my grade level and it's a complex text, I'm going to be using all of my resources to figure out what that text means. And I'm going to be looking at meanings of words I don't know, or using those context skills and building out that, those reading comprehension strategies that I would use. And we need to make those available for the students to use as well. chunking the text. We are working now on these live documents. You're not restricted to the size of a piece of paper. So we should be pre-chunking the text for our students so that they know, oh, I should pause here and make sure I understood those last 3 paragraphs I read before I moved on. So inserting a little formative check for understanding. And if they can't answer that question, tell them to go back and reread, or give them a hint check, like reread paragraph 2 specifically, right? So we're getting them to learn to stop, check their comprehension before they proceed. And if not, go back and reread with purpose. Thinking about what I mentioned earlier about modeling. Again, we're on devices now. So we don't have to just model once in front of the class. I remember going to a training with, his name is going to escape me now. It'll come back to me later. He's very, very popular when it comes to teaching reading comprehension strategies. And it starts with a K. You may know it. And we're no longer restricted to modeling one time and then saying, now you do it to the students, right? Why aren't we recording ourselves modeling these behaviors and these practices? So I read the first chunk, I record myself reading it. I make my thinking transparent to my students. I show them what it means to pause when I don't understand something, take a look at the context clues and move on. I show them what it means to pause and say, did I understand what I just read? Am I ready to move on? And then they can watch it again and again, or they can go back and review that multiple times. So all of these things are good teaching skills that we did offline, and the technology enables us to do them more effectively, more efficiently, more consistently in the classroom.
That's excellent. It's interesting because I've had a lot of experience working in schools with large ELL populations and from different places. And, one of the things that I was just wondering if one of the things you run into sometimes is that the adults don't realize that the kids are able to talk with them. Mm-hmm. So the conversational language works really well, mm-hmm. but they kind of fool them because their academic language not so well. And
yes, definitely.
I was wondering if that's been something that you've had experience with. I know that's kind of probably a strange, goofy question.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. It's the old fix and calcs, right? It's this idea that you have you're lacking the academic language. And that is very common with my students, especially because many of them came from cultures where English was maybe embedded culturally in the language piece, but not in the written communication or it's conversational. And most cultures around the world are picking up on some version of American English, and just through like the social aspects of things, right? And the way that we permeate with our media and, these Hollywood's everywhere, right? But definitely different. It's a different type of comprehension. It's a different type of use of language. And that kind of is what I was getting at earlier with the example of supporting students across their school day with what we're doing in that EL specific time. And so understanding, what do my students need to know in order to be to do their higher order thinking in their social science classes and in their science classes? How can I take those needs across their school day and incorporate them into my teaching practices in my classroom and build out that context and experience? Learning language, all language, whether it's the highly academic or the conversational, it's about exposure and experience and practice and repetition. Like one typical teaching strategy with like coming across a new vocabulary word that I had to learn as a ESL teacher. When I first started, I would pause, look at the context, think about the word. What does this word mean? How does it relate to the other words in the sentence? Do we understand what this word means? Let's reread the sentence again, replacing this word with a new, and you stop and spend 5 minutes talking about one word, and the students have lost that continuity of thought for the whole passage. And I had to step back and say, as a native speaker of English, when I come across a new word, I don't do that. That's not authentic. So teaching students how to determine if understanding that little word is interrupting their ability to read and comprehend the passage, Or if maybe the next time they see it, it's going to build a greater context. And the third time they see it, it's going to really build out a context. And then the fourth time they see it, okay, I understand what this word means now. So really determining how you in your classroom can give your students that exposure, that repetition, that experience again and again in a way that is so cool, because then my students would come back to me and say, oh my gosh, miss, we were talking in science class and we were talking about, such and such. Can you believe that? I'm like, no kidding. But it was on purpose. Of course, I'm trying to expose you the first time in my class in this really supported environment. And then when you go experience it in science class, you're not overwhelmed and scared and, like, oh my gosh, I don't know what's going on. This is too hard for me, right? So this like release of responsibility and this introduction and this repetition and circling around and around.
I love it because that's, there's so many nuances of all that mixed in there, and it's cool to hear. And I could see where, technology, software would really help kind of catch some of the places where they're stumbling, where because they're going to be participating in it and not being able to kind of cover up what they don't know.
Yeah, it makes it transparent too, and that's what so with the classroom management software that we were mentioning earlier too, that's something that I would often use it for. It allows you to see what your students are doing on their computers and see where they're getting stuck and see where they're struggling. And so the ability for the teacher to kind of step back, give the students some type of task or assessment, and to like see their thinking on that page in a way that is hard when students are on devices. It's hard to see what they're doing, not just their behavior, but see what they're learning and see how they're interacting with the content that you're giving them. So yeah, it's super useful.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah. One of the things I want to do, let's shift here, because you also have experience in trauma-informed practices. And, what exactly does this mean and what's it look like in the classroom?
Yeah, I think my experience with trauma-informed is more limited than my experience with ESL. I worked at a trauma-informed school for 1 year, but kind of echoing back to what I said earlier, I think a lot of teachers, if they were to hear about trauma-informed practices, they would say, oh yeah, I'm already doing that in some way, shape, or form, because teachers who have been in the classroom and who care about their students and who love their students and their community, they know when a student comes in to school and is not ready to learn, right? That you can see it. You can see it on their face. You can see it in their body language. You can see it in their demeanor. And as a caring educator, we'd probably stop and check in with that student. And then the more you start checking in with those individual students, the more you realize I should be checking in with all my students. Maybe the student has a smile on their face, but they're not really ready to learn either. So working in a trauma-informed school, it was really about building out a shared vocabulary around mental health of the individual and building out a scientific understanding that different parts of your brain influence the way that you process learning and emotions, and that these parts of your brain can be affected, impacted, and negatively impacted by trauma. So it's a baseline understanding from teachers that you can't tell if a student is dealing with trauma because you can't see their brain from the outside, but you can incorporate practices into your classroom that give you that important feedback as to where your students are at, where they're at mentally and emotionally. Are they coming into the classroom ready to learn? Do you need to connect with that student on an individual basis or connect them to resources? And I mean, even my experience at the trauma-informed school was my most recent teaching position. But 5 years before that, I was working with a teacher who started doing daily surveys to their students via a quick Google form. And she was doing it to rate, the way she phrased it was like rating their happiness. How are they feeling before the lesson? How are they feeling after? She wanted to understand the emotional journey of her students while they existed in her classroom and in that space. But the root of that is the same, right? We want to know, are you happy? Because if you're happy, then you're able to engage. And I guess happy is kind of a dumbed down word for it. It's a little bit subjective, but the idea, the intention there was good and true. So thinking about establishing this shared vocabulary around mental and emotional health, how it relates to the science of our brains, sharing that understanding with our students, empowering them to have a language that they need to advocate for where they're at throughout their day, at the start, in the middle, or at the end of their day, and then incorporating those conversations and those that safety into our classrooms. If the teachers value recognize and understand this in their students, then the students feel safe communicating their needs back to their teachers.
Very cool. It's interesting because I think that, there's so much stuff going on. And, one of the things that we have unique challenges that we face every day. And before we talk about, because we're going to talk about some stuff that you're seeing as a result of the pandemic, but before we go there, can we talk just a little bit about some of the kind of everyday challenges that, that the teachers are facing with a social emotional type background? And can we just talk about that just a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a pretty broad question. I think it really
it
goes back to the very beginning of our conversation, right? When you said, what would you recommend to a first year teacher? And I said, well, if it was me, and then just generally. And I said, building relationships, getting to know your students, getting to know the community, getting to know what that community is, values and what they're about. In my first year teaching, I was teaching with a charter management organization in Southern California, and we were empowered to go out and knock on doors and introduce ourselves to the community we were serving. We were all teachers, and not all of us lived in this neighborhood, but we wanted the neighborhood to know who we were. We wanted the families to know who we were. So it was about going out and seeing the street that my kids would walk down to get home, seeing the houses they would go to, understanding what their lives looked like beyond the walls of the school. Now, the flip side of that is, can I fix that whole community? Can I go out and, repaint the graffiti or rebuild the buildings or make that perfect? No, that's not my job. I can only truly affect and impact what's happening in the walls of my classroom or in the walls of my school. But I can do it in a way that's informed and in a way that's meaningful because I know what's happening outside of the walls of my school. And I think that that's a really important piece that really, I think a lot of teachers were, their eyes were open to it from the conversations I've had, both with my customers across the country and then my own family, as I mentioned, to our educators, having those Zoom meetings and seeing into their homes a little bit or understanding engagement and what engagement looks like on devices, and students who maybe wanted to engage but truly didn't have the type of life at home that would allow them to. It has impacted educators that I speak to in a way that they say, wow, I didn't know, now I do, and I'm going to teach differently because of it. And I'm going to make sure that my classroom is a place where my students can feel very successful, welcomed, embraced, cared about, because I didn't realize that maybe they're not getting that after they leave. And so I think that we have a lot of opportunity here to allow that little glimpse that we saw into some of our students beyond the four walls of our school and impact what we do during that school day because of it.
That's excellent. It's one of the things that, and I think this is where, being support mechanisms for teachers and trying to deal with, and administrators, and trying to address and deal with, because you hit something, you targeted something. Because sometimes, going back to something you said earlier about telling yourself don't stress out over so much, because there are some things you have no control over. And you may not be able to change the community, but you can help the child. And,
right.
and so it's interesting what you're talking about there, because if you get too focused on all the stuff you can't do, then we start talking about, how long you're going to be able to stay in the
we hosted a webinar in the fall of last year, and we invited some teachers with distance learning teaching experience to just give some advice to our customers and our educational communities, like, hey, this is how we do it and it's effective, and these are the things that we do that work for kids in the distance learning environment. We don't need to reinvent the wheel here. Like, let's share best practices across these boundaries, from our online teachers into these, teachers who are becoming online teachers very rapidly due to COVID. And one of the speakers in that presentation mentioned this, which I've seen it used in lots of different contexts, but the spheres of influence, right? And so you have direct ability to influence and impact yourself and maybe those who you're interacting with on a daily basis. So as a teacher, you think of this as myself, my attitudes, my ambition, my positivity, like this is something I have control over. And maybe I can influence and have a positive impact on the students in my classroom. But maybe the school at large isn't really something you can directly, control or influence. And then the community beyond that, you certainly can't. But you have to decide when looking at a situation, where does this fall in those spheres? And the things that are way out on that outer edge, especially as a teacher, sometimes you have to kind of let those go, because you know that the stuff that's you're directly able to influence is going to eventually enact change at that level. But you have to really focus on what's immediately surrounding you and find your successes and overcome your trials and tribulations at that small level in the hopes that it will continue to grow and influence at that larger level. And I think that is why a lot of teachers feel burned out right now. And I think that's why a lot of teachers feel tired and frustrated. And I've noticed a lot of teachers moving away from the profession. And I think it's because they feel this weight on their shoulder of all of those spheres. And we have to empower them to kind of let go of some of that stuff on the outside and just really work so hard to impact those students who are in front of you every day. That's your sphere of influence. That's where you can make a difference.
I think that's just so impactful what you just said, because that is a big part of what, it's driving them nuts, because they're trying to change. They're trying to do everything, and
everything.
Yeah. You can't do that. And so you have to find that thing. And part of what's they got to be careful of is the idea that they might have the, kind of the whole, reason, part of the magic of why they became a teacher in the first place, they might feel like it's been driven out of them, I guess is my point, because between the pandemic and all kinds of other stuff and stuff that they have no control over yet, they have their classroom and they kind of have to figure out how to have control over it in this, this new virtual or whatever the world is that they're, as they're going back to face and so forth. And I think that's something that is we may never have really thought about it much in the past. It's kind of in our face now. That's why you kind of see it, because I think teachers forever have been trying to do, more than probably what was in their sphere. It's just that it's become more just really there, thanks to, all right, am I going to have 5 kids this week? Or am I going to, today, or am I going to have 25? Or am I going to have, or when's it going to be that we're all going to be shut down and sent back home again? Or, whatever. Yeah.
But again, you have to just keep telling yourself, I can't control that. I can't control if we shut down. I can't control if we go back to distance learning, but I can create some consistency for my 35 students. I can create some consistency for my students who see me for that 1 hour a day if you're at secondary, or however you're, that's where you can. And that's where you can also feel successful. And so sometimes you have to kind of bring it closer to you and your community in these difficult times, especially.
Yeah, I love that, because that's just having that realization, I think, sometimes, because the magic of teaching is, like you talked about at the beginning, you're working with the kids and the light bulb's going off or it's not, and you're trying to figure out how to make it go off, and then finding those little things that make the classroom magical for you, whether it's, that you spend some time and doing this activity or that activity that makes them, kind of get into it. And just like you were talking about earlier, they come back to you and they say, hey, yesterday in my biology class, they were talking about this and I was able to say that because of what you did the other day. And so, it's good stuff.
Yeah, exactly. That's the best part of teaching. That's the parts I miss for sure. Those student interactions that you're like, oh, wow, I did something that made your life better and happier and made you happy to be at school and made you feel part of this school community. Like, oh man, that's such a win, as an educator. So
very much so. Yeah. Let's kind of shift into the pandemic, because that's where we are. And new issues have come up, which one of them is called learning loss. We have all these new words out there now that are part of our vocabulary. And even though learning loss has been around before, not in this type of fashion where it was, we had to shut down everything and people went away, and then we had to try and figure out where they went and try to get them come to the computer and all that sort of stuff. And then back into the buildings. How can using technologies help the teachers, this kind of address this learning loss that's been kind of made to happen?
I know, as we've been talking about this, both as an organization and how we can support learning loss, as well as, talking at my visits home, it's always all this teacher talk around the table, right? Like, we're all so invested in the community of being educators and being involved in education. And I always joke, my sister-in-law, who's a nurse, would always say, "Oh, here they go again. The teachers are talking."
Nice.
But it's true. And when we talk about this, I often think about the opposite. So something I used to always get into, not even debates, but I always kind of disagreed with people about, was how we treat our honors students. So a few years ago, the districts I taught in kind of went away with having a separate honors class, and they integrated our, quote unquote, honors students into all the periods of the day. So I'd have I'd have maybe 5 honors students, 10 students not honors, 5 students with special education needs, maybe 3 to 10 ESL students, depending, et cetera. So you have this really mixed roster class. And it was always this debate of what do we do for these honor students? And some people in the English department would say, "Oh, I have them answer 3 short answer questions on the test instead of 2, or I make them write 5 paragraphs instead of 3. And I'm like, so you just make them do more work. That's not fair.
No.
That's not honors, And so what I would do instead would be thinking about the cognitive challenge of the task that I'm asking of them, right? And give the tasks of my assignments or my assessments different cognitive challenge, right? And so maybe you're asking students to recall what they learned and summarize and reading comprehension, or you're asking them to apply that learning across multiple texts. And so they're still going to be producing the same amount of, that production part of the writing task, but they're going to be doing it at different cognitive levels. And I think that we can consider that same strategy when we think about how to adapt for this, learning loss that we're going to be experiencing. And in my mind, this learning loss is really just going to be about becoming an expert at differentiation. And differentiation, again, doesn't mean necessarily giving different tasks to different students. It can, absolutely. That's a lot of work for the teacher, coming up with 5 different tasks for each assignment. But it's not that hard to just start embedding choice into every aspect of your lesson. And that was kind of what I was touching on earlier too, is this idea of giving students choice in how they absorb the material. Are you having them only read? Are you just giving them these long texts to read? Is that going to be an effective learning experience for all students? No. So you give them chunks of text and a video to watch and formative questions built in and something to do that's more interactive for those kinesthetic learners who need to immediately do something with what they just read. So giving them that choice throughout the lesson in how they're absorbing the material, giving them that choice in how they're demonstrating their learning and understanding of that material, giving them choice in how they work with partners or within a group in terms of the different roles and responsibilities they have for that learning process. And I think it's really going to come down to creating lessons that are guided by the students, not the teacher. That's how you prevent teacher burnout right there, by the way. If the teacher's working harder than the students, there's a problem. You should be the architect of the learning experience, and the students should be doing the work of the learning, right?
That's major right there.
Yeah. So you're creating the learning experience, you're creating the framework, because you, as the expert, the pedagogical expert in the room, know that there are certain routines like this release of responsibility model, students practice, release responsibility for them to practice on their own, et cetera. That doesn't take preparation. That's just how you're executing throughout, right? So starting to think, you take your standard lesson that maybe you used 2 years ago in the classroom and you say, where can I embed choice in this? Where can I embed cognitive variations in what I'm asking of the student's learning experience? And whether you're transparent with the students about those cognitive differences or not is up to you, and how you want to articulate that to the students. And if you want to say, hey, everyone has to answer A, or if you're really feeling up to the challenge today, take path B. You decide. You own this learning experience. So which path are you on today? And I think it'll depend on the age group of the students, the content area, et cetera, but betting that choice, right? And helping students learn to start to monitor their own choices. Man, I chose path C and I'm really struggling here. Maybe I'm going to go back and try path B and see if that feels like a more comfortable experience for me. So yeah, just thinking about choice and how we can incorporate not more and less work, not more and less work for you as a teacher, not more and less work for the student, because making the student write 5 paragraphs instead of 3 paragraphs is not an honors level coursework. But thinking about, going back all the way, in our teaching credentials, your zone of proximal development, or, your that where can we get the students where they're challenged but not overwhelmed? It's really going to come down to being thoughtful in that throughout the lesson cycle.
That's awesome. And just to know, there are a whole bunch of kids out there going, you tell them. That's it. Exactly. I don't need more questions. Yeah. I like that. So that's good stuff. One of the things that, we've had to, that's happened as a result of the pandemic is that some teachers become more familiar with technology, and it's super cool. And then some figured out that where they thought they were comfortable, they didn't know as much as they thought they did. But now, it's funny. Before the pandemic, I was doing my podcast interviews, and there were a lot of people that were in my age bracket that were really kind of embarrassing when it came to trying to figure out how to do a Zoom with me. All right. Not now. All right. As a matter of fact, Zoom has become and by the way, this is not product placement. They do not sponsor my show. Yeah. So, although not that I'm not open to it, Zoom. Yes, exactly. I'd be very open to it.
I can mention them more.
Yes. That's funny. But it's funny for so many reasons, because now it's almost become, people talk about Zooming, people talk about Zoom, they talk about, and they actually were using WebEx, or something like that. And I think it's
like Kleenex or something, right? It's
yes, exactly. That's that Kleenex is, it's actually something else, anyway, I just think it's interesting how different that's become. How do you think this is probably impact the teacher for using like Impero software to help work and reach kids and so forth?
Yeah, I think we're going to see, which we see always in education. And I compare it to like the pendulum swinging, right? So I think like we had teachers who were using no technology, and then they went, ooh, and now they're using like all technology. And so I think this is going to be a really cool year to like stop that pendulum from swinging back and forth, and just kind of like allow it to settle. I think that there's still a fear or misconception among teachers and that the technology, students being on devices, is somehow replacing them or preventing them from owning that creative part of teaching that's so fun, and that lesson execution part that's so fun, and the creating of the curriculum and the content that's so fun. And I think all that can still exist side by side, all of the tools that we have at our fingertips now and at our disposal. So I think as teachers are returning to the classroom, I don't anticipate, and I hope that they don't put those computers back on the shelf and say, well, now we're back in person, we don't need these anymore. Right. But there's a time and place. And I think teachers learned about Zoom fatigue. I think we learned about device fatigue. I think we learned about students feeling burned out by being on devices, and that there's nothing wrong with doing an activity that involves making a poster, and there's nothing wrong with talking to the students who are next to you and using these other creative parts of our brain and using our dialogue to discuss with the person, and understanding the right way to incorporate technology so that it's transforming and improving the lesson. If you're not improving your lesson by using the technology, then reevaluate the lesson and think about, what am I missing here? How could I be improving this with technology? Or don't use the technology, right? It shouldn't stand between you and the learner. It should enhance that student's learning experience. It shouldn't come in between you. And that's something that, we do talk about with classroom management software. Sometimes there's a fear that, oh my God, it's another thing I have to use. It's another tool. There's so many programs. There's so many of this and that. but it should really just be like embedded into your technology routine. So it should be pretty hands off, and it should aid you and support you when you have those students who are on devices and learning. And there's a lot of other really cool tools out there too that, encourage you to do offline activities and then maybe find a way to document them and digitize them into the online world. So kind of going hybrid, I guess, in a different way, right? So we figure out a way that the learning that's happening in the classroom is communal, because that's the benefit of all being in the same room together. But then maybe there's some element of digitization or technology integration that should ultimately be making the learning experience more effective for the students. Whether that means helping them to be organized, helping them to have a routine for, taking that learning and making it something concrete, whether that means building that portfolio for them to go back and look at later. I think organization on devices is a whole other topic that you could probably do an entire podcast about. But it's different than organizing a binder. And so I think teaching students what digital organization looks like and the value of that too is all of these things are opportunities when we're back in this in-person classroom.
Right now, I've got these different colleagues in mind who have like 300,000 little folders on their desktop, and it's like, oh my gosh! I know obviously 300,000 is a little bit of an exaggeration, but it sure looks like a lot, Yeah. And the
notorious folder that I may or may not have on my desktop that's just called desktop, and I just dump everything in there before the Zoom meeting so no one sees my crazy desktop. So I just highlight, throw it all in there.
Yes, exactly. That would be another example. I love that. It's interesting how much this kind of world has. One of the things I think's happened is that it's kind of helped us see the different roles that technology can play as a support mechanism, and I think that's
and just like going back to what I said earlier too about the students driving the learning, right? And with technology, like it can be scary, but I mean, defer to the experts in the room, right? Right. So my mom's gonna kill me for telling this story, but she did. I just talked to her a couple of days ago. She's retired, but she goes back and substitutes. She's in a long-term sub position right now, and she's with kindergartners. And I think she's in the room like helping, but anyways, she had to take them over to this like computer lab kind of experience for them to go work with a different teacher. And there was all these tablets out on the tables when they came into this room, like a library or something. So they come in and my mom's like, don't touch them, don't. And the kids immediately, they're touching them, they're signing in, they're opening things. And my mom's like, no, you don't know, and the teacher in the room, who was the computer teacher, was like, let them, like they're not going to break it, like let them poke around, let them play with it. Like that's the best way for them to learn. And it's just funny because, I think that people who are less comfortable with technology are very afraid of breaking something, clicking the wrong thing, getting lost in this, wormhole of links and not being able to find your way back to that first tab you had open, right? But the next generation's not. They're not afraid of that. And we have to let them click and let them drive sometimes. So again, you're the architect of the learning experience. You want your students to learn how to do research. You shouldn't be blocking the entire internet. You need to learn them how to do safe, practical digital research, and then let them drive, let them do it, and I think, again, also going back to what we talked about earlier, that's where the true learning takes place. Those moments that you didn't plan for and expect and that are truly authentic. But some teachers are going to disagree with me on that. They're going to be like, no way, Jose. no one's driving this but me. But there's moments and times for all of it. So
most definitely. And I just think it's interesting how in just a short period of time, one of the most positives that could ever come out of this is how familiar people are with realizing that the technology can be a friend and that they can find different ways of driving the instruction in there, and that it also has helped them realize there are tools that they can use to help differentiate and to learn how to address the different needs of the kids, which is so cool. We're we're getting close to finishing up, Kaitlin. And before we close, if someone wanted to connect with you or learn more, where would you send them?
Yeah, I think we've got some great resources on imperosoftware.com. And from there, you can find our different social media links. We're on Twitter, we're on Facebook. I am, as was mentioned, a senior account manager with the organization. So if you decided you wanted to give any of our products a try, we would probably cross paths, and I would be there to make sure that you're successful in implementing what we offer and making sure it matches with what you're trying to accomplish in your classroom at large, right? Because all technology should be helping you to be the most effective teacher that you can be. And if it's not, then find the tools that do work for you for that, because that's what they should all be doing. Very cool.
Very cool. I got two last questions, but before I go there, I did have to say this. It's kind of cool what you're talking about with having your family being educators. And so then they get together because like I'm the outsider in my group, so there's certain topics they learn to stay away from that smack anything or Steve might go on a run about stuff that they're all going, yeah, whatever. Okay. Oh, that was funny. So if you have a group of educators in the family, that might be an interesting Thanksgiving dinner or something. I don't know.
Yeah. And I think, even when we disagree, we do still agree, because I think if you're a good teacher, everything you're doing is because you want your students to be successful. And so it's interesting and helpful to hear other people who, have a different approach than you, because you all want the same end result. Right. And so, I've learned a lot from my siblings, especially my sister who teaches special education, because she runs a fully inclusive practice at her district and had to really push for that and say, we don't need our students separated from the general population. They should be in the classroom and learning all the time. And that's something that I really took to heart in my own practice. And, when it came to integrating my students with special needs into my classroom, it was like, of course, always. But then she taught me how to do it effectively and do it in a way that was meaningful for all the students involved. So, absolutely.
Very cool. Very cool. So here's my first of my last questions, and goes like this. How do you keep going when there may be so much going on that you may want to quit?
How do you keep going as a teacher, as an educator?
Just you personally, if let's say you got all kinds of projects going on, you got this going on with the family, you got that going on, and you're like, I'm done.
Yeah, I usually have like a running to-do list, and I'm big on lists, and I get a lot of satisfaction on checking something off my list. And so for me, that's like a really big way to mentally cope with like feeling overwhelmed or burned out, or like I'm just done. I want to throw my hands up in the air and be finished. It's like I just kind of pull out my to-do list. It's like, okay, what's something I can get done right now? And I can just put that big check mark or cross that line through it. And that brings you like a lot of satisfaction and feeling of accomplishment, right? And now that I'm saying that too, it's like so true. I think that would be true for teachers and students too, right? We are always talking about students coming into the classroom and giving them an opportunity to feel successful. And so we have these students who are coming into our classrooms feeling overwhelmed, feeling scared, feeling a lot of the fallout of last year. Like give them an opportunity to feel like they are checking something off their list right away, metaphorically. Give them that chance to feel successful in that moment so that they don't want to quit, right? It all applies. It's all human psychology, right?
I like that. You're right. Last question. Do you have a teacher in your past who made a difference in your life? If so, who was it? And what would you say if given the chance to say thank you?
I think I've had a lot of teachers have really positive influences in my life. I mean, my mom was a teacher, so she obviously had a very big influence. A teacher who like immediately pops into my head was a high school English teacher I had. And he was the first like adult in my life who ever like articulated to me what my future could look like, and I was always a pretty good student, and I was always a student who planned to go to college, but I would plan to go to college because that's what you do after high school. I didn't plan to go to college because I had some career aspirations or some vision of my future. And I remember him having like really serious conversations with me as a junior in high school about not what college are you going to go to and what are you going to major in, but like, what's your life going to look like? And encouraged me both to feel confident that I could be successful no matter what I chose, but that I had like certain, ways that I approached different topics in his class and the way I looked at things critically. And he was like, I could see you going this way. And that's not the path I ended up following. He envisioned me having a life as an editor of a magazine and traveling the world and living this, and I guess I do a little bit of that now with my current position, but it was just really cool to have an adult say, I could see you doing some cool stuff in your life in the future. I could see you doing this and this and this and things I hadn't dreamed for myself. And so it allowed me to dream for myself in a way that I hadn't before that. So it's neat to talk to kids about what you could see them doing in their future.
Really is. That's so cool that someone, that person talking with you like that. Awesome stuff. Hey, Kaitlin, thanks so much for talking with me today. It was awesome learning how we can address the social, emotional, and academic needs of special education and ELL students and all our students. It was also great talking with you about how technology can support all the kids that we teach. Wishing you the best in all you do.
Thank you so much. It was really fun.
Teaching Learning Leading K-12 is excited to be a member of VoiceEd Radio. VoiceEd Radio. Your voice is right here. Teaching Learning Leading K-12 is a proud member of the Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. The opinions expressed on Teaching Learning Leading K-12 are those of the guests and host. Teaching Learning Leading K-12 is intended to share ideas, advice, and suggestions for classroom teachers and school administrators. Teaching Learning Leading K-12 is produced for educational purposes. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll share it with your friends.